Hey guys, I know this series is getting a little long, but there's not too much left to talk about, he says. In this part, I'm gonna spend the entire next hour or so gushing about all the things I've come to love about Sonic Adventure 2. Like I've said, these videos may be the last time I ever talk about these games, so I'm not leaving anything out. Let's make it a list to keep things simple then, why don't we? Number 1. The multiplayer. The multiplayer in this game is awesome. Now, please keep in mind that I'm mainly talking about the game's later releases on the GameCube, PS3, and so on. The original Dreamcast version has some multiplayer content, but not a lot. Other games like Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 06 would have similar unlockable multiplayer modes, but this game puts all of those to shame. Usually, those games just have a few stages, and most of the time, they're not even ones made for the single player, just shorter, made-up ones. And yes, Sonic 06's multiplayer is a bit more content, but it has a lot of other issues bugging it down. So here's the gist of Sonic Adventure 2's multiplayer. You've got your foot races, treasure hunts, shootouts, and more. The speed characters have access to almost every single speed stage in the entire game once you've done enough in the single player mode to unlock them. City Escape, Radical Highway, Metal Harbor, Green Forest, White Jungle, Sky Rail, even Final Rush and Final Chase, they're all here. The only speed stages they left out are Crazy Gadget and Pyramid Cave, which is pretty understandable since these stages aren't exactly two-player friendly, but still. Most of these stages are designed well enough that you can have two players not constantly get in each other's way or end up cut off from an important route. And in cases where that could happen, they fix it by placing a spring there so whoever's in second place can keep going. There's also a couple of extra stages where you just snowboard to an instrumental version of City Escape's theme or grind on rails and stuff, but we'll get back to that. After collecting a certain amount of rings, you can attack the other player by using a character's special moves or slow them down using Chaos Control. Checkpoints can make or break these races for you. See, when one player passes through a checkpoint, it activates for both players. So the other player could be really far behind you, but all they have to do is stand on a ledge, wait for you to pass through a checkpoint, get themselves killed, and boom, suddenly they're warped to the checkpoint that you've just crossed. So a lot of more confident players will ignore the checkpoints to avoid giving the other player that advantage. But the player in second place can still attack you at any time, provided they have enough rings, and if you're above a bottomless pit or in some other danger, you'll be sent all the way back to where they are because you didn't activate any checkpoints. Whoops. It adds this huge risk versus reward factor to the races that I'm not completely sure how to feel about, but I think I like it. Find someone who isn't crap at this game, and these stages can be pretty darn fun in multiplayer, or at least funny as balls. Then there's a treasure hunt. Not a lot happens here. You look for emerald pieces, and whoever gets 2 wins the stage. There are also a couple of smaller maps where you only need to find 1 piece to win, but that's more of a beginner's thing. Just like in the foot stages, you can hit the other player with a special attack once you've collected enough rings. If the treasure hunts don't piss you off in single player, maybe you'll like these. In any case, I appreciate the effort. Then there's the mech battles. Remember those extra smaller stages that each of the other multiplayer modes have? Well, the mech battles are basically nothing but that. They don't let you slug your way to the end of the single player levels. You're mostly confined to these little arenas based on the themes of those other levels, and you beat each other up. There are a couple of races, but these are just obstacle courses where you blast your way to the other side. It's pretty weak, but I have to admit, racing through the longer stages would probably be more trouble than it's worth. It would be ridiculous being able to screw the other player by shooting at them as they hover over a bottomless pit, or hey, they might have a small lead that puts them in the perfect position for you to blast the shit out of them, and the whole checkpoint system would probably cause a lot of rage and hijinks, as players keep respawning next to each other, not getting anywhere. Granted, that sounds pretty amusing, so I would like to see that happen, but whatever. The battles themselves are still reasonably fun, and if that's not enough for you, there are 6 other characters you get to play with in these modes. They have different speeds and abilities. For example, Amy is a slower speed character, but she barely needs any rings to attack the other players, slow them down, or just be a general pain in the neck. And Metal Sonic can't use these special attacks, but he does have one other trick, and can use the black shield to plow through whatever's in his way. It makes him invulnerable as long as he's going fast enough to keep it activated, and once he gets going, it's hard to make him stop. But you can only use it as long as you're careening in a straight line, and these levels have so many twists and turns, I think it prevents him from being overpowered. You also get to play as Tikal and Chaos in the treasure hunting stages, and a pair of Chao piloting giant versions of themselves in the mech battles. That not enough for you? How about a complete set of special outfits for the main 6 that alter some of their abilities? Still not enough? How about a second line of Christmas and Halloween themed skins? Hey, while we're at it, how about some car races featuring 2 sets of cars and another playable character? How about some Chao races and karate tournaments while we're at it? This multiplayer is everything. You could be at this with a friend for days. One thing I may as well point out is that some of the level up items from the single player, such as Sonic's bounce bracelet, don't get carried over to the multiplayer. I think this was a smart move, since some of these characters get certain abilities in the single player mode that their counterpart doesn't, and Sonic being able to save an extra second here or there by using the bounce bracelet to descend faster than the other speed characters, or Eggman having more health than Tails thanks to the armor upgrade he gets, or Knuckles being unable to drown thanks to the air necklace that Rouge doesn't get, would give these three characters an unfair advantage over everyone else because they've got more equipment. All in all, the competitive multiplayer is the best you'll find in any Sonic game. At least the 3D ones. I'll leave that for you to decide. Me though, I think it's pretty great, and it's just one of a few things we'll be going over that give this game insane replay value.
Hi, buddy. Oh, you got hit by a jet!
Number 2. The scale. This is a big one, unsurprisingly. If there's one thing this game has, it's scope, but it's a different kind of scope than Sonic Adventure 1 had. The first game had these hub worlds that connected the stages together and gave you a sense of where they all were in relation to each other, making it feel more like a world than a series of levels. This game has many more stages though, and no hub world to connect them. So how do you capture that scale without a hub world in the middle? Well, how about a map? I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say that this is my favorite stage select in almost any game. Now, simply throwing a map in there to connect all the stages together isn't remarkable in itself, lots of games do it. But this one is just so good and really captures everything about SA2's world that it needs to. I mean, okay, I think it might be almost tied with Super Mario World's overworld, which is amazing in itself and objectively has more depth and interactivity than this one. But this is a battle in my mind that could rage on forever. I just love everything about this stage select screen. It's so stylish and full of character. Lots of colors, simple lines, clear geometric structures, and it's so wide it really feels like some map you'd pull out of your glove compartment and unfold to be like 5 pages wide. You'll get to see where all the stages are in relation to each other, which characters go to which stage, all the missions you've completed, your rankings, everything, and it really shows where the story's focus is. There are a ton of levels that take place on Prison Island. It's sort of like going there and doing your business as wrapping up the first act of a big epic story. Then there's a sizable chunk of levels around Eggman's desert base, and the arc pretty much has a map of its own. You see how so much of the story is focused on certain environments, and it does an excellent job making you feel like you're part of this big adventure like nothing else you've ever seen in a Sonic game. For all the flack people give Mad Space and Meteor Herd, you have to admit that the idea of a stage that doesn't even really take place on the arc itself, but just the floating, flaking bits of debris tossed around that one cutscene is a really great concept for a level. 2, maybe pushing it. Still, they're different enough, and it gives you that sense of scale. Even the little things, like Skyrail just being a different area of Pumpkin Hill during the day is pretty neat, as it makes these feel like regions, landscapes, zones, not levels. Still, we need to talk about the reuse of assets in these places. As you may have just noticed, these stages are very similar in terms of aesthetics, and they're not the only two like this. True, there are just over 30 stages, but not necessarily 30 differently themed environments. One thing you'll notice is how a lot of stages introduced in one campaign will usually have a counterpart in the other campaign. For every headquarters, there's a death chamber. For every green forest, there's a white jungle. For every sand ocean, there's a hidden base. For every iron gate, there's a prison lane. For every Route 101, there's a Route 280. For every mad space, there's a meteor herd, and for every final rush, there's a final chase. That last bit sounded oddly poetic. A lot of people point to the themes shared across these stages as a criticism, saying the game doesn't have enough unique environments or ideas and that the stages are too repetitive, and this confuses me. Was it any less repetitive to have to go through literally the exact same stages as multiple characters in the previous game? Sure, a lot of these levels may look kinda samey, but they're not the exact same locations revisited. It feels more like they're just different portions of a much larger environment, though there are a few instances where they do share certain set pieces, like this one that appears in Green Forest and White Jungle. In the last part, I brought up how Death Chamber feels like the second half of Headquarters, the second act if you will. Well, a lot of these stages are like that. Eternal Engine feels like Act 2 of Lost Colony. Route 280 feels like Act 2 of Route 101. You can compare a lot of these stages that way, and you know what? I like that. It gives us a bit more of that classic feel, and if anything, it makes me wish that you could play through all these stages in one massive campaign, so you could get that Act 1 and Act 2 feel and so on. If you never had any gripes with the repeated stage themes in the classic era, let alone the actual stages themselves being reused in Adventure 1, then if anything, you should see this game's selection of stages as an improvement. Going back to the stages individually though, another level I think is a nice sense of scale contained in itself is Sand Ocean. This pyramid seems so far away at the start, but by the time you're nearing the end of the stage, you can see it visibly coming closer. Now to this point, it's just an asset pasted on the inside of the skybox. It's not something you ever actually get to interact with. But as you're traversing through this section, you can't see the pyramid anymore, so they take this chance to load an actual 3-dimensional pyramid at the goal. That's pretty clever, and there's a lot of cool bits like that in this game. Hidden Base does something similar. You're pretty much at ground level towards the beginning, with a literal sand ocean stretching as far as the eye can see. But throughout the stage, you end up going higher and higher until you reach the top of the pyramid. After a while, it does the complete opposite of what Sand Ocean did, and stops loading the sand on the ground, replacing it with a background that makes you feel like you've climbed really high up. I just love how these stages start to gel together after a while into this huge adventure-filled blob of content. None of these stages are actually connected, but thanks to some clever use of themes and locations, they feel like they are, even more so than Adventure 1's levels. Dare I say, it helps us feel like one of the most cinematic Sonic games ever made, and I hate using that word to describe a video game, but it's true. I still think Sonic running from one end of an aircraft carrier to the other in seconds, all while planes fire at him from overhead, is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in a Sonic game. Before I talk about any more stages though, I need to address something else. Number 3. The story and overall presentation. This is sort of continuing that whole scale thing. We're not quite done with that. But now we're going to look over some other stuff. I think it's safe to say that I'm about to spoil a lot, but I'm not going to bother summarizing the plot this time. I'll just focus on certain key elements and characters. I'd also like to direct you to Shame's Sonic Spitball Part 2, where he goes over some of his gripes with SA2's plot, among other things. Some Call Me Johnny has some similar issues in his review. If you have time for these videos, check them out. Now, I'm not sure I could say Sonic Adventure 2 is a good story, but it is an entertaining story, so it's alright in my book. A lot of people bring up certain plot holes, but I'm not sure most of them can really be called that. Simply neglecting to provide us with information that would make it easier to piece a plot together is not a plot hole, it's just neglectful and kinda lazy. A plot hole is only created when you present us with information that establishes something about a world, only to later present us with conflicting information, creating a massive contradiction, and thus a plot hole is born. There are only a few instances like that in this game though. Some of the other things people point to are just really vague and leave it to us to fill in the blanks. That's not necessarily a plot hole, that's just the game withholding information from us, which isn't much better. In fact, it's probably worse. Let's look at Shadow in particular. Shadow is called the ultimate life form not because he's super powerful, but because he's super healthy. He doesn't seem to age, and it's pretty much impossible for him to ever get sick with anything. He's immune to all disease, and it's through the creation of Shadow that Gerald was hoping to unlock the secrets of life and save Maria from a terminal illness that she was afflicted with at the time. Heck, Shadow could probably cure all the world's ills just by letting the people of Sonic's era take samples of his blood, find out what makes him immune, and come up with some way to make it compatible with others, even humans. Of course, even Gerald didn't make it that far. Supposedly, at the time the Ark was raided by the military, Shadow was only 1 week old. Now if that's the case, then it's no wonder he barely knows anything about the world and got such a warped impression of things from what little he was able to remember. So if it seems like Shadow's motivation for what he does in the present is kinda dumb and misinformed, I'm gonna give him a pass because he's basically a toddler. However, there's hints that maybe Gerald tampered with his memories and reprogrammed him with his lust for revenge before he died. Now as for why Gerald thought it was a good idea to make the cure for all ills a giant lizard is such a failure that it carries an iron lung on its back, and then a 3-foot-tall hedgehog of all things? That's just the artistic choices they took with this game. It's silly, but welcome to Sonic. If hedgehogs like Sonic and Shadow are fairly common in this world, I'm not sure I can call it a plot hole that he made Shadow one. I mean, yeah, it's weird, but so what? It's a cartoon. But you know, that does bleed into one thing that's always bugged me a little bit about these games. Aside from the main cast of Sonic and his friends, we never see any other Anthros walking among the humans. We see it in more recent stuff like Sonic Boom, which are more or less made for us Westerners by Westerners, but for some reason the more easy-squeezy Japanesey Sonic games don't even dip their toes into that kind of territory, and the presence of Anthros in these games is slim to none. The most extreme example I can think of this in recent memory would be Sonic Unleashed, which only had Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Chip, a character exclusive to that game, and Sonic 06, which had, for the time, pretty realistic humans. It's kinda weird. It's like Japanese audiences just don't like these kinds of characters as much as we Western folks do. They relate more to the humans that Sonic interacts with. It's almost like Sonic is some Japanese kid's imaginary friend, or like he and his pals just flew in on a spaceship and they're the only ones of their kind here. Now, if you just want to chalk it up to all the Anthros living on an island or in a forest somewhere with their own society that's mostly disconnected from humanity, like in the Archie comics, fine. But at the very least, I'd love it if just once you could walk up to a human and they'd have an honest, believable reaction like, "Whoa, what are you?" You know? They did that in the comics. It would make it at least somewhat understandable that these people would think, "Bah, them hedgehogs all look alike," and mistake Shadow for Sonic if anthropomorphic hedgehogs are such a rare phenomenon. Seeing Sonic and his friends walking around a somewhat realistic, human-centric world has always been strange to me. It just feels wrong when they don't take the opportunity for some fish-out-of-water material when you'd think this would be a goldmine for that sort of thing, or at the very least include the presence of some Anthro NPCs walking among the human ones. I mean, SA1 kinda did that with the Echidna tribe, but that was it. That said, this is just the direction they wanted to go in for a time, and I'll give it a pass in this game because of the story. It feels like these characters are being sucked into something much bigger than themselves, a conflict that they shouldn't necessarily be a part of, and unintentional or not, it's interesting, so I'm still okay with it if it's just this one time. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I may as well address two plot holes that people do bring up from time to time. I've already talked about people thinking Shadow is Sonic, which is dumb, but whatever. The next one isn't really a plot hole either, more like it's just a part of Sonic's growth that's left unexplained. When Sonic is about to die near the end of the hero campaign, trapped in space with nothing but the counterfeit Emerald Tails made, which shouldn't even be able to work like a normal Emerald would, Sonic, in this dire, desperate moment, is somehow able to use Chaos Control, a power he's only seen Shadow use once. This comes off as a pretty big ass pull to some people, but I like it. I think it's a great moment for Sonic. All throughout this game, we see Shadow built up as this ultimate being with super strength and chaos powers and is totally radical. And then Sonic goes and proves that the gap between their power isn't so huge after all. He may not be as ultimate as Shadow, but he still pulls through. In terms of simply building up a character, this is awesome. I don't know if this is just some latent ability hedgehogs in Sonic's world sometimes have, and maybe that's why Gerald made Shadow a hedgehog, but yeah, whatever. Sonic's gone super on at least a few occasions before this game, so maybe he's been enriched with enough of the Emerald's energy over the years to unlock this new power that Shadow was only designed to have. Whatever way you slice it, it's still reaching, but I think it's an awesome feat and a big moment for Sonic. Now, let's address the one element of this game's story that I can actually call a plot hole in good conscience. So Gerald goes insane after the raid on the Ark and tampers with it to smash into the earth and explode should someone else use all the emeralds to power it. The thing is, how did he do that? The diary we see on the final story, or at least part of it, was apparently recorded during his execution. He says all of this, and then he's mowed down by a firing squad, in the very cell that they kept Sonic in 50 years later. Now we can wonder why Gunn didn't flip out after he revealed his entire plan to their faces and destroy the Ark then, but, well, maybe the remains of it would just fall to Earth and damage it anyway, or maybe that's why there are so many leftover gun robots guarding it now. The biggest problem with the scene is how Gerald could have done all of this. Did he do it from his prison cell on Earth? My only guess is that maybe after seeing Maria's name listed among the dead, he was somehow able to escape custody for a time, possibly even make it back to the Ark, and reprogram it, and possibly Shadow wherever he landed, before they were both captured by the military, and Gerald was executed. That's the best sense I can make of it, take it or leave it. It isn't a huge issue for me, but I can understand how it is for some people. The point is, it shouldn't be so hard for the writers to patch up something like this in however long they had to write this story, when I was able to do it in a few sentences off the top of my head just now while writing this script. There are moments when this game goes to dark places, darker than almost any other Sonic game, but as gloomy and angsty as this game can be at times, it still has some of that Sonic charm we've come to expect. The cutscenes are admittedly kinda sloppy, with characters sometimes talking over each other and whatnot, but they're so much better than SA1's cutscenes. The animation is dynamic and lively, and the characters express themselves almost constantly through body language that makes them feel alive, and not in that stilted, pantomiming way we see in a lot of games like Unleashed and Colors, where it feels like the animators have nothing to do, so they make the characters act out random gestures with their hands constantly, so they aren't standing completely motionless for a minute or so. The movements in this game feel much more natural and give the cutscenes a nice flow. There's a spring to their step. The facial expressions are good too. There are a lot of moments that gave me a chill the first time I saw them, way back when cutscenes like this could actually be considered impressive. Like here, where Rouge looks to the side and bites her lip all sneaky-like. Or here, where Shadow looks like he's about to fucking cry. And of course the bit everybody references where Eggman scratches his bum. The voice acting isn't amazing, but I'd say it's appropriate. The voices suit the characters, and they don't over-enunciate every single syllable of every single word like the 4Kids voice actors were directed to do for a time. And the more emotional moments feel pretty genuine. Dean Bristow is great as Robotnik. He just has this biting edge like he's old and grumpy and pissed at these dumb kids always shitting on his porch, like he's had enough of their crap and is going all out this time. And David Humphrey is pretty great as Shadow. Some of his moments are a little hammed up, but it never comes off as annoying. He broods a little bit here and there, but he's still cocksure and proactive enough that he doesn't become boring and feels appropriately like a darker reflection of Sonic, given these similar traits. He's always doing something. I always like that he affectionately calls Robotnik the Doctor. It sounds like something a kid would say, and it's just another one of those subtle things that endears me to Shadow in this game. I also like that he does have a change of heart at the end of the game. During his final moments, he seems really optimistic and happy, like a huge weight has been lifted off his shoulders and he's stretching his arms for the first time. He laughs, he commends Sonic, he feels really genuine. And David Humphrey gives the character a much greater range of emotions than Jason Griffith or whatever the fuck his current voice actor's name is ever have, or were ever given the chance to. Of course, the writers just had to ruin any future potential his character had to develop by making him a brooding, dour, edgy the hedgy in future games, because they think that's the only way to make a character badass. I mean, come on, these last few moments were beautiful, and they ruined it. Oh well, I'm not gonna make a thing out of this. You've heard me rant about the state of Shadow's character before in my Rise of Lyric review. Anything else I could say here would just be me repeating myself. I'm not necessarily in the camp that thinks Shadow should have died in this game, although I wouldn't mind that if it would save the character some shred of dignity. I just think they could do much better things with this character than they have. Anyway, moving on. The music that plays during a lot of these cutscenes is great, but it plays a little too loud to make out what the characters are saying, especially on the most recent re-releases, which is just stupid. Overall, despite how out of place the plot of SA2 may seem, I see the presentation of the story is actually pretty fitting for a Sonic game. The cutscenes are full of energy, the plot is constantly moving, and the characters are inoffensive, but still have some of that good old 90s bite to them. It's clumsy, but it's engaging and endearing. I just get such a sense of passion from this stuff that it becomes infectious. Going back to the story itself, yes, the ending is extremely dark for a Sonic game. And I don't blame people like Some Call Me Johnny or Shay for saying it's completely unfitting for a Sonic game, and was better off not even being attempted. But again, I'll give this game a pass, because as out of left field as Gerald's Madness may seem, it's not like it isn't foreshadowed throughout the rest of the plot. The game has such an eerie feel the entire time, like some dark spirit is looming over you, and it comes smashing together at the end. Cannon's Core is such a cool stage because of how it builds upon everything we knew about the game already, and I think the whole idea of Gerald being the real bad guy is ingenious. Looking at all the times Eggman's been betrayed by some god monster or whatever he sought to manipulate, I find SA2's story much more compelling because this is a member of his own family doing it this time, and from beyond the grave, and it's up to him and the other characters to take responsibility and clean up the mess created by this even greater evil. This is a legacy left to him. It's just a much more personal affair this time, deeper than the schemes he usually cooks up on his own. And he has a stake in this like any of the other playable characters, and I think this what gives a greater emotional weight than most of the other 3D Sonic games, and it's what gives this entire game this dark edge. Games like Shadow tried to be dark, tried to replicate this, even take it further, but they didn't have that thick, ever-present atmosphere that SA2 has that gave it some measure of tact. SA2 doesn't feel like a half-assed parody of something like Shadow's game did, it feels genuine, so I'm able to take it more seriously. Point is, as goofy and all over the place as SA2's plot is, at least it's told probably about as well as it could have been, given the subject matter. Well, not quite. I have seen it told better. A few years ago, the great Clement did his own run of Sonic Adventure 2, and he did it in a pretty interesting way. Instead of going through one campaign and then the other, he combined the two campaigns and proceeded through all the stages and all the cutscenes edited together in as close to a perfect chronological order as we'll probably ever get. And you know what? Seeing it play out this way made so many of the issues I used to have with this game's story just disappear, or at least feel much smaller and less glaring. And I gotta tell you, splitting the story into two halves does a great disservice to this game. It makes everything feel more disjointed and almost makes the story fall apart. But seeing it play out like this makes it so much better. The pacing is better, and the build-up and atmosphere are much stronger. It flows better, it feels larger than life. Just seeing the story told the way it was always meant to be told has made me appreciate and love it so much more than I ever thought I could when I originally reviewed the game like 7 years ago. It's one of those LPs I come back to every couple years, to experience the greatness of it again. I've already mentioned how a lot of earlier stages took place on Prison Island, and a lot of later stages take place on the Ark. I also found it interesting that a lot of the villain stages take place fairly early in the story, and then the focus shifts to the hero characters for a while, and then the two are mixed together in the final stages aboard the Ark. It's just another little thing. In practice, this makes the game feel like some giant blockbuster movie, and it's really fun that way. It's such a shame that most people don't get to experience it this way though. It sucks that none of the game's re-releases give you an option to play the game like this, as I really do think the story would flow much better this way and elevate the experience substantially. For example, in the hero story, you hear the President's secretary mention their agent reporting in. Well, what do you see right around that time in the Dark story? Rouge reporting in. Now, granted, it does give away a huge twist a little early, but I still think it makes the narrative more tight. Merging the two stories into one would also improve the order of the stages. Lost Colony is the first stage I ever play of this game, and it left an impact immediately. It's the first stage that takes place aboard the Ark, so it has to make an impression. The music starts out underplayed, but a little eerie, picking up as you go in, but not too much. We're exploring this place as Eggman, making it feel like something completely new that most of the other characters would be even less prepared to explore than him. It's shadowy and spooky, giving the impression that this whole place has just sort of been sleeping for all this time, never really dead. And all the while you know Shadow is here, but you don't know where he is. It's foreboding and sets the mood for the place really well. At this point, it's only just starting to wake up, but then you come back to it as the hero characters, and it's completely changed. You see many more sides of the Ark, more layers of it. There are bright colors and lights everywhere, all sorts of things moving around and churning and sliding into place, really making it feel as if the place is coming alive. And it gets even crazier in Ken's core, as the deepest parts of the Ark have an even more intense range of colors that constantly seem to be changing. And the deeper you go, you see more weird architecture, more complex machinery, more flashing lights, more intensity, more of everything. But that impact is somewhat diminished if Lost Colony isn't your first taste of this place, because you played through the hero campaign first and didn't get to see how far things have come and how much things have changed in the order that best conveys it. I can ramble on about how much better the game would be presented this way, but the sad fact is, it never will be. It's always going to be the way it is now, so the problems people have with this game in its current state are always going to be there. Oh well, even in its current form though, I say the presentation is pretty great, if a little sloppy. One of my favorite extra little things is getting to hear other characters chime in during gameplay. Sometimes you'll hear a voice in an intercom alerting enemies to your presence. Other times, characters like Sonic, Tails, or Eggman will address you directly. I like how the heroes are always encouraging each other and seeing how the others are doing. Now on the flip side, the villains are usually heard bickering and being assholes to each other. Yet even then, you see hints that they still kind of sort of care. I love how in Security Hall, Eggman eventually just outright yells, "Rouge, you're going to die!" And he sounds really flustered, it's great. Of course, he really just wants the emeralds, but still, it's fun seeing the characters get so worked up. And of course, everyone points to Crazy Gadget as another great example of this, with Dean Bristow on full blast. It's awesome. Bottom line, the game just looks, sounds, and feels great. It does veer pretty far away from what I feel a Sonic game should be about, but never so far that I stop enjoying it. Even though it kinda goes off the deep end in the final campaign, I still think it's a good payoff after all the game's other build-up. And there's just something about a lot of other games' second to last twist that feels half-hearted to me compared to this. At the very least, I can say the game is a lot more memorable than most Sonic games made since then. I feel it hit a certain sweet spot that could only really be hit once and would be almost impossible to find a second time in this day and age. But you know what? I'm fine with that. I didn't used to respect this game or its story very much at all because I didn't feel I should, but it's become something special to me. I'm just going to chalk up people's problems with the story's tone and whether or not certain elements were a good idea or not to personal preference, and how much they're willing to tolerate. And I don't expect to change how people feel about it just like that, but hey, I've changed a lot over the years, so who knows? As jarringly dark as Gerald's madness at the end is, I don't see it as a flaw. I won't criticize the game for it. I don't think it takes away from this game, it only adds to it by suddenly making it seem so much bigger than I could have imagined it being. It escalates until the stakes are higher than they've ever been, and I love it for that. Number 4. The enemies. This one's gonna be pretty short. I used to find the enemies in this game kinda boring, but looking back, I'm impressed by what a wide range of enemies there are in this game. The variety of gun robots alone is impressive in itself. Yeah, you don't see that many different kinds of gun robots, but they come with a variety of weapons and equipment that give them different uses. Some gun beetles stay in place, some zoom past you like it's a drive-by shooting, some roam around dropping bombs, some electrify themselves. The humanoid robots come with standard blasters, lasers that travel faster, blue goo stuff that stops you in your tracks, and some of them come with shields, forcing you to change your tactics. These enemies will fire a certain amount of missiles at you depending on how far you are into the game. First 3, then 6, then like 10 or 12. And some of them are equipped with laser cannons, so they can keep firing at you. These tanks come with 3 different varieties. The first is easy to kill with pretty much any attack. The second variety comes equipped with spikes, so you've got to somersault through them. There's a third variety that's so heavily armored that you can't even damage it, and it'll try to rush you if you're far away enough. The trick is to push it off the edge of a platform like the bullies in Mario 64. Then you've got the bigger beetles, even jets. There's a couple areas where these things aren't even active, so you can just bomb the hell out of them. And this is just Gun's roster of baddies. You've also got ghosts, a few of Robotnik's baddies from SA1 in the classic games, some mass-produced D-series robots, some of the deadliest enemies in the game, and a few variants of Artificial Chaos. These guys are really weird and you only see them in the last few stages, but there are a lot of them. And then there's these things. I don't even know how to describe them. Now that roster still might not seem huge, but I appreciate how wildly different these enemy types are. Stand a Badnik next to a gun robot, or a ghost, or an Artificial Chaos, and it becomes clear just how diverse these enemies really are. I also appreciate the context these enemies appear in. For example, you never see Eggman shooting at his own Badniks in places like Sand Ocean because, well, of course they wouldn't be there to attack him. This is probably why Gun was even introduced, so that the bad guys would have something to fight, and Eggman wouldn't have to bomb his own forces. These Badniks aren't the main focus of this game in terms of enemies, but I appreciate that they're still there. Their inclusion just makes the world feel a bit more fleshed out and keeps it from leaning too far in a different direction. I like that the ghosts appear in a lot of stages, usually in the middle portion of the stage select map, but stop appearing after a certain point. Once you beat King Boom Boo, you don't see any more ghosts ever again. Certainly none on the Ark, though it would be pretty creepy if the spirits of the scientists who were killed up there stayed on board the Ark and haunted it all these years. But still, that's what I like about this game, is its focus in certain areas. Not every enemy appears in every environment because not every enemy is appropriate. Not every enemy has any story justification being in a certain place. As for why there are so many gun robots aboard the Ark, well, I've already brought up how they may be leftovers from Gun's raid 50 years ago, probably left there to keep guys like Robotnik out. Or heck, maybe they're actually Gerald's creations and the ones you see on Prison Island are just shameless copies of his designs by the military that edited him. Either way is cool. I wish we'd gotten to see the Artificial Chaos, one of Gerald's creations, fighting against the gun robots. Instead, they attack Eggman in stages like Cosmic Wall, even though you'd think he'd find some way to control them. Oh well. In short, the range of enemies in this game is good. With over 30 stages, of course they weren't going to be able to whip up an entirely new batch of enemies for every stage, but at least they don't all appear in the same stages, and no one kind appears in every stage. Well, aside from the one gold gun beetle that appears in every single stage for extra points. Everything else just appears when appropriate. Heck, in the unlockable Green Hill stage, they even made 3D buzz bombers that move and behave differently than the gun beetles, and these fish Badniks that behave differently than any other enemy in the game. How easy would it have been to just reskin some of the existing enemies as classic Badniks and copy and paste them into the stage? These devs were anything but lazy. I also like the bosses quite a bit. The character battles are a lot more interesting than Adventure 1, and usually aren't over nearly as quickly, and there's a decent variety of other bosses like the Egg Golem, King Boom Boo, and Gunsmiths, not to mention the final boss. I do think there was a big missed opportunity for Sonic and Eggman to fight at some point in the story, but I understand if this would have undercut the theme they were trying to establish of characters with certain playstyles always being pitted against their counterparts and giving you a taste of what the multiplayer is like. No matter how you slice it, the bosses and enemy variety in the game is satisfactory. Not perfect, but I can't exactly say it's a step down from SA1's enemies. The character battles in that game were way too easy, and the variety of Badniks was pure Sonic goodness, but considering the material they were working with in this game, I think they handled it well and gave us a good range of surprising new enemy types and bosses that just made this game stand out. Number 5. Grinding. Oh my gosh, you guys, grinding is bananas in this game. It's not perfect, but I think that considering this was their first try and is still more involving and fun than it has been since, says a lot about it. In a lot of future Sonic games, grinding isn't anything too complex. You just sort of let Sonic glide along a rail. Sure, you can boost in some of these games to speed him up a little bit, but there's not much more to it than that, and in Lost World I feel it was simplified even more. Now keep in mind, I'm not just talking about level design, I'm mainly talking about the physics and the kind of level design that's built around that, you know what I mean? In these games, Sonic is magically propelled along the rails, and yeah, you can slow him down or speed him up a little bit, but again, this is hardly groundbreaking stuff. But in SA2, the mechanics of grinding are pretty complex. Well, okay, maybe that's not the best word for it. The mechanics themselves are pretty simple on paper, but they're also flexible in practice. Everything is taken into account here. If you crouch, you'll grind faster because you're hit by less air resistance. The rails themselves will often tilt either way, forcing you to adjust your angle. I think it's actually possible to lose your balance completely and fall off because your character stops clinging to the rail. So when the rail tilts a certain way, you have to adjust to that. If it's tilted toward the inside of a curve, tilt with it. If you don't, you'll be pulled to the outside of the curve and lose your bearings. Speed, as you can imagine, is a huge factor. It's really easy to lose your speed if you aren't doing what the game wants you to, and losing all your speed will cost you dearly. The better you apply the rules of grinding, the faster you'll be. One of my favorite things to do is jump off the end of a rail. If you do it just right, your character will fly through the air, making all these cool flips and shit. It just feels so gratifying. And then there's other things, like being able to slam down on a downward rail with a bounce bracelet to get a burst of speed, or spin dashing right onto a rail from a platform. Now of course, there are reasons for the grinding mechanics of future games being so streamlined and simplified. When you introduce this many mechanics, you're also introducing a lot of variables. You create so many new ways things can go wrong, and they do sometimes, such as when you switch from one rail to another. If you're right next to a rail, you won't exactly jump from one to the other, more like you're being magnetically yanked over there really hard. Sometimes you just won't connect with the other rail and you'll fly past it into a pit. This sort of thing doesn't happen nearly as easily or as much as it would in Sonic Heroes, which is where I think they sort of gave up on giving the player this much freedom when grinding. In Shadow the Hedgehog, jumping to another rail is much safer, and the character has an actual jumping arc and animation. This would continue to be developed in Sonic Unleashed and so on, where you use the shoulder buttons to trigger a similar arc. The jumping is just one of many aspects of grinding that would be sort of nerfed in order to ensure the player isn't going to die in some humiliating way and blame it on the game. Now in an effort to mix things up and keep grinding from getting too stale, you often see them place 3 or so rails together and litter them with spike beds or gaps, making you jump from rail to rail in sequence like it's a sort of minigame. It's grinding's equivalent of sidestepping. They have to add fluff like this because the moment they stop throwing things in your way, it immediately becomes apparent just how shallow grinding like this truly is. If they didn't do something, grinding would get really boring really fast, and even now, going back to it, I find it pretty underwhelming. I do appreciate some of the bolder level design choices that were made in Lost World's grinding stages, but they still don't blow me away. In Sonic Adventure 2, however, there's so much depth to these mechanics that the simple act of grinding on a single rail becomes interesting. A perfect example is the Rail Race, a multiplayer-only stage. Almost this entire stage takes place on rails. If this were like grinding in later games, there wouldn't be much to it. But there are so many ways this can go. A more experienced player can get a massive lead over the other players simply by using the mechanics given to them. I think this stage perfectly captures just how cool this gameplay is, because it shows how even in the most simplistic levels, the mechanics themselves are anything but, and can really surprise you. Sure, grinding in later games may be more stable, but I just don't find it nearly as interesting or fun as it is here, because you're given so much control in this game, a level of player input we never see in future games. Even Sonic Heroes threw out a lot of the little nuances that made grinding engaging, things that worked before, so now people can focus on is whatever doesn't work. For all its faults, for all the ways it can go wrong, I still find grinding to be so much more fun in this game than it has been in any game since, because you're given so much freedom. Going back to SA2, let's take a look at a stage that I haven't talked about yet. Final Rush. Oh, this stage is awesome. There's so many shapes, so many slopes and corkscrews and loops, and hardly any of it feels automated because it's all on rails, with boosters placed very sparingly. As strange as it must sound, this stage reminds me a lot of how the classic games played, with their rolling physics being surprisingly similar to this game's grinding mechanics. There's so many rails that if you play your cards right, you can make it through huge portions of the stage without ever touching anything that isn't a rail. It's amazing, and we never get to experience anything like it again. But you know, this sort of plays into a much bigger issue that I think encompasses more of Sonic's and Sega in general's games, but I'll save that for the final video because it's just too big to gloss over here. Grinding is just one small part of a much bigger issue that can make or break these games depending on what kind of player you are. Number 6. Controls. Okay, so remember when I said in part 1 that Sonic's controls in Sonic Adventure are some of the best in any 3D Sonic game? Notice I didn't say they're the best. That's because these are. I'm serious, Sonic's controls in this game, at least in some respects, blow SA1's controls out of the water. While Sonic and SA1 had pretty ideal physics and nice controls overall, there was still one thing that really bogged things down and proved to be an issue. The collision detection. It's alright so long as things don't get too crazy, but on the occasion that they do, such as when they start messing with gravity, all hell breaks loose. I have no excuse for this. Well, actually I do, but we'll get to that in a minute. So even though Sonic himself plays just fine, the way he reacts to changes in the terrain and environment can get in the way sometimes, and it's not enough of an issue that it ruins the game for me, but it is a mark against it that for the most part the sequel is completely rectified. I shouldn't use completely and for the most part in the same sentence. Yet even then, I can't say any of this with full certainty because apparently this is yet another thing we can sort of blame on the ports. The Dreamcast version still had some collision detection issues, but whatever changes they made with the later versions only exacerbated this problem. How did they get this so wrong? They didn't just switch textures around, it's something about resizing the maps or whatever. Look, I don't know. One very important thing you have to remember about me is that I know nothing about game design. I have opinions about it, but I don't know anything. And I definitely don't know anything about programming or porting games. I'm basically just a disembodied voice on your computer, or maybe more like an imaginary friend that likes to ramble a lot. As long as you keep that in mind when watching these videos, I think we'll be okay. Anyway, I've already gone over Knuckles and Rouge's great controls, and I've talked ad nauseum about the way the mechs move, and I just got finished gushing about the grinding mechanics for 5 minutes. So let me say that Sonic and Shadow's running and jumping and rolling controls are great too. I've made it out of so many little scrapes over the years because their movements are so fluid and responsive. I've also gotten into a lot of scrapes, but that's more my fault than the game's. I like how after you reach a certain speed, you'll see these white speed lines coming off the character's model, and they don't seem to mess up the controls any, so it's a nice effect. Also, the homing attack feels amazing to use in this game, much better than it is in any game since in my book. It feels more flexible than a lot of later games, and it's a tad more natural and less janky than in SA1. On the other hand, in SA1 there was always this great kind of impact every time you hit something, but it's still satisfying in SA2. Rolling feels as amazing as it ever would in a 3D Sonic game. It is admittedly a little wonky. Rolling down certain slopes becomes a battle to retain control of the character, as you have to keep your thumb on the joystick to save them from rolling off the outside of a curve or rolling from side to side or some other thing. But I like that. It keeps you in the game, and just like in the classic games, when you really get going, rolling is much faster than running on foot will ever be the rest of the time. It makes you feel like some heavy torpedo-like wrecking ball, it's great. SA1 gave you some opportunities to do this too, but the terrain was always a little more awkward, and aside from a few instances in Speed Highway and Windy Valley, you didn't get a lot of chances to just roll down a big hill and really tear it up, and it was way too easy to touch a wall and cancel the rolling animation. Sonic Adventure 2 makes it much easier to just keep going. I also like how, despite controlling exactly the same, the two hedgehogs have very different animations. Sonic runs as you'd expect, but Shadow skates, giving his stride this unique weight to it and making him feel a bit different. If he just ran normally like Sonic, he wouldn't stand out from Sonic nearly as much. Another thing I may as well talk about are the scripted events. Like SA1, this game has its share of scripted sequences, loops, and the like. Now you may remember my explanation of how these set pieces were handled in SA1 in the first video, and if you don't, just go watch it again, please. I'm not going to repeat myself here and make this video even longer. Well, with that previous information in mind, let me just say that the scripted events in this game are a lot more solid. It is still possible for things to go awry if you really fight the game when it's trying to pull you into a loop, but they aren't nearly as wonky or full of holes as in the last game. One thing I consider a big improvement is the camera angles. They're more dynamic this time and follow the character through the loop, instead of jerking to the side and staying there. Now I just wish we had more control over the character inside the loop, but I understand that Sonic Team was just trying really hard not to make them broken, because people would complain about that. In any case, the loops in this game are much more effective as a thrill ride than they were in Adventure 1, and they're used sparingly enough that I don't get tired of them. Other set pieces like Sonic bungee jumping are pretty great too, and aren't overdone. If these sorts of things happen almost constantly, then I'd have a problem with them because it would cheapen whatever gameplay there is by taking away the player's input and forcing them to watch the gameplay itself, something that Sonic has been accused of seemingly since its creation. But the automated, non-automated gameplay ratio is alright this time, I think. There's a lot more going on than you'd think in these levels, and I think it makes up for the linearity or whatever. On a side note, remember when I said the mechs were fast? I wasn't kidding. Look at this. And just look at how fast Eggman is on foot. I died at this part the first time I saw it. They actually animated him getting hurt and made him say ow, like they knew somebody was going to fiddle around with this game and make this happen someday. It's so funny. Still, can I just take a minute to say that I love that Robotnik is blowing everything up in a mech version of the Eggmobile? That's badass. It's also badass when Tails does the same thing. To Robotnik's end, I love how this adds to his character. You hear a lot of people talk about how cool he is in this game, how he has this menace to him that he would lose in subsequent games. And not many of these people, that I've heard anyway, have been able to put their finger on why. But I think I can. It's a simple fact that he's actually getting involved. In every game made since, Robotnik mostly observes events from the sidelines, sometimes butting in during cutscenes or a boss fight, but rarely doing anything beyond that. The reason Robotnik is so cool in this game is because he's actually doing the shit himself. He's not sitting in a chair watching his forces attack Sonic on a monitor or getting bored. He just puts on his seatbelt and jumps into the battle himself using a small, surprisingly efficient mech to get the job done before anyone knows he's there. And as much as I like seeing his bigger, zanier creations in other games, there's something more personal about the walker he uses here. I think part of it may be because it feels like something he'd whip up in the earlier Genesis games, before the design started getting crazy. In any case, the simple fact that you're stopping around and blowing things up as this character makes his shooter level such a power trip. There's something about Eggman being a less active, more distant observer in later games that just makes his character less engaging. I wish they'd find a way to throw him back into the fray with Sonic in a future game. I mean, they sort of do in Lost World, but I still don't think it comes close to his portrayal in this game. Sonic Adventure 2 is the game that defined Eggman's character for me. Tails doesn't benefit from this gameplay style quite as much, but he still does benefit from it. The gameplay is admittedly pretty unfitting for him, so it's understandable why people are so much more forgiving when they see Eggman doing this exact same thing. I do miss the thrills of how Tails played in Sonic Adventure 1. However, given the context of Tails' involvement in this game's story, I do think it adds a bit to his character and keeps me engaged. Sonic gets thrown in jail, and what's the first thing Tails does? He soups up his plane to transform it into a mech and blasts his way into the complex himself, because he knows that it's bogus for them to imprison Sonic like this. He knows that Sonic would never do whatever it is they're accusing him of, so the little guy takes things into his own hands, and to make it better, he goes it alone. He doesn't ask Amy or Knuckles for help, he just does it himself. This is a bold direction for his character, and I think it continues his development from his campaign in SA1 nicely. It helps, of course, that you're only ever destroying robots. I can never imagine him actually hurting people for Sonic. I guess it's for the best then that the story doesn't force him into a situation like that. Still, as cringeworthy as it might be that Tails wouldn't simply jump out of his mech and fly away to save himself if it falls into a pit, I've gotta admit, it's pretty darn cool to see him doing this. I wonder what direction they'll take with his character in the future. One thing I can't believe I forgot to mention last time is that Tails and Eggman each have a health bar. Well, their walkers do. Some are a little iffy about this, but I think it's a good move personally. One of the biggest criticisms I've heard directed towards Sonic games in general over the years is that the rings make things too easy. You could get yourself hurt as many times as you like while playing as Sonic because, hey, as long as you always manage to snag that one ring, you're basically indestructible. With hundreds of rings littered around every stage, all you really need to get through the game is one. This is just one of the rules of Sonic games, but some apparently have a problem with it. They think it removes the challenge. Well, in the case of the walker stages, I can safely say the inclusion of a health bar adds challenge in a really nice way that works better here than it would in any of Adventure 2's other playstyles. First off, there are a ton of enemies in some of these stages, and when 3 or 4 of them are all shooting at you at once, one of those is probably going to hit your gigantic hitbox. Just not getting hit is a lot harder in these stages for many reasons. Now what's really nice about having a health bar is that if by some chance you get hit and you don't have any rings, you're not gonna die. And considering how hectic things can get, especially in hard mode, I think that's an okay trade-off for limited vitality. You're still encouraged to collect rings because those refill your health bar, but it happens pretty slowly. I do like that if you collected at least 20 rings before being hit, you can scoop them all back up provided you weren't hit over a pit, and replenish some of the health you lost. Now and then you'll find an item box or pass through a checkpoint with the right amount of rings to get a medkit thing that instantly refills your entire health bar, but these are placed sparingly enough that it doesn't make this gameplay too easy. It's more of a relief when you find one. Still, being hit only a certain number of times in a short time frame before dying does add a certain layer of challenge to these things. If I hadn't mentioned it by now, every stage in this game has a hard mode, and damn, even the early mech stages like Iron Gate can get pretty hairy. There are so many enemies now. you have to be really careful about your choices. Like, okay, I'm in this room full of enemies that have already started shooting at me. Do I keep locking onto them to get more points and risk getting hit for the 4th time? Or do I blast the guy who's already shot at me soon enough to cancel out his bullet before it can reach me? Because you can't do that. It becomes this huge risk versus reward deal, and it's pretty tight, as they say when you get a certain number of points. Simply put, I think the inclusion of a health bar gives these stages an even more unique feel than they already would have had without it. The fact that you can get hit without carrying any rings and not die is a nice way to meet us halfway, what with all the enemies and how huge your hitbox is, but the limited health does add an interesting challenge, and the use of rings to replenish your health is a very clever, if not ingenious idea, I think. Whatever it is that bugs people about this design choice, I think it's a worthwhile trade-off for the benefits. Anyway. Number 7. The music. Music is one of those things that's really subjective, so I won't talk about this for long. In fact, the soundtrack was something I completely skipped over when I talked about SA1 in the first 3 parts, mainly because I wanted to compare the soundtracks of both games. I like both soundtracks a lot, but I like them in different ways. Just as the level design of the character-specific speed stages in SA2 seem a bit more narrow and focused than most of SA1 stages, which were made for multiple characters with different playstyles to be able to traverse, the music follows suit. SA1's soundtrack is pretty diverse, but I won't be focusing much on the kind of music that plays during cutscenes or even in the adventure feels. The in-stage music is consistently peppy. Most of it is electronic rock with some jazzier tunes here and there depending on the stage. While there are tunes that seem to be made just for the zone and are a pretty big departure from the rest of the soundtrack, such as Lost World, some of them feel like they could play in a few of the other stages and still fit just fine. Still, every tune is distinct and very memorable and fits its environment. Most of these melodies sound like the kind of music you typically hear in a classic Sonic game, just composed with different tools. So if that's what they were going for, I'd say they succeeded. SA2 takes its music in a very different direction. While SA1's themes seem to be made to fit the stages themselves, this game's music is made to fit the characters. In most cases, it sounds like music the characters themselves may be caught listening to on the job. Sonic and Tails are accompanied by rock music, though Tails is a bit more laid back and not quite as overplayed as Sonic's. Knuckles is accompanied by hip-hop with hints of jazz here and there, and a little UK garage. Shadow's music is kind of all over the place, but it's mostly a darker spin on Sonic's music. Rouge's music is smooth and jazzy and I enjoy it a lot. Let's just say it made our levels less stressful in those first few runs of the game. It's just nice. Eggman's music is the hardest to describe. It's very industrial, but it changes a lot throughout the story. I think it's the most underplayed of the 6 styles, but it seems to capture the widest range of moods. I mentioned Lost Colony's music before. There are ambient, foreboding tunes like that which enhance the story, and then there are some that feel like a simple power trip for the Doctor, like Weapons Bed. It's interesting stuff. Cosmic Wall ends up being one of the most intense and dramatic tunes out of the entire game, not because it's the loudest or has the most beats, but because of the build-up, and everything that's riding on you by that point in the game. There's so much at stake, and you can just feel it through the music. As you can see, the focus of this soundtrack is very different than before. In Sonic Adventure 1, areas you'd play through multiple times as different characters had to have music that wasn't so tailored to one of them that it wouldn't fit the other characters, with a few exceptions. But SA2 doesn't have that to worry about. The tunes still fit the environments in small ways that make them work in any given stage most of the time, but they're clearly made to suit the characters or fit that point in the story. They're a lot more specific that way, and not everyone is gonna like that. I'll be the first to say that in terms of simply fitting a world, SA1's soundtrack is better, but in terms of fitting a story, I'd say SA2 wins here. It kind of adds to that more movie-like feel that this game has. And I can't think of a more perfect example of this than City Escape. This is magic. I still get pumped every time I start this stage, and a big part of that is thanks to the City Escape theme. I love it! Everything about this stage is meant to feel like some action scene in a movie where we're getting introduced to Sonic. Like these are the first minutes of it with credits flashing by as Sonic does cool things to the beats. It is so fun to try to time certain actions with the music, slamming down a rail with a bounce bracelet or jumping off a ramp or even just hitting an enemy at the right time with that mindset. It keeps me coming back. and while none of the other stages quite reach that height of sheer epicness, some of them still come pretty close. It's not as versatile as Windy Valley Act 1, it wouldn't fit just any stage in any Sonic game, but it fits this, and it makes for a great moment that would cement itself in the memory of Sonic fans forever. And live and learn. What a great culmination of everything this game's been building up to. It's hard for me to decide which gets me more pumped, this or Open Your Heart in the perfect Chaos fight. It used to be an easy choice for me, but like a lot of other things I've talked about, it's not so clear-cut anymore. And that's SA2's music in a nutshell. Sure, it may not have quite the same versatile, almost universal flair that a lot of tunes in the previous game had, but that doesn't make them bad. They're just more focused. I remember every single one of these in-stage tunes, and much of the rest of the game's soundtrack. They're good songs. This is a good soundtrack. It's just good in a very different way than SA1's soundtrack. If you ask me which I like more, which I prefer, I wouldn't be able to tell you now. I may prefer one soundtrack one moment and then the other the next because I don't like them in the same way. I have to be in a different mood for each. Well, that may not be completely true. I don't exactly have to be in a particular mood to be sucked in by SA1's music. It just makes me happy. To enjoy most of SA2's music, you do have to be in a certain mood to really get the full effect. The rock music in SA2 is not like SA1's more Genesis-like electronic rock. In fact, most of these tunes don't sound quite like something that would play in a classic Sonic game. They're still good, but there's not much else I can say about them. I will say there's an awesome Genesis-style remix of Supporting Me and a few other remixes I really like. In fact, I'd like to see more of these Genesis-style mixes be made, and prove me wrong. Number 8. The ranking system. I mentioned a couple of times now that this game gives you points for doing certain things. Nearly every Sonic game made after this one features a ranking system, and this is where that trend started. The games would evaluate your performance throughout the level based on how many rings you've collected on the way, how fast you were, and a few other factors, but in games like Unleashed, it's pretty lax. And in Generations, all you really have to do is make it to the end without dying most of the time, and boom, S rank. A lot of people think Sonic games in general are really easy. Again, all you need is one ring, right? But the challenge presented in games like this isn't necessarily to beat it. It's to look good while you beat it. To play through it enough times that you master the level, learn to take advantage of every possible opportunity to steal more points, and to not make any mistakes. This is where the real challenge of SA2 comes from, as well as its replay value. But later games are so forgiving and make it so easy to get points, it kinda makes the ranking system feel almost meaningless in some cases. Even in Sonic Unleashed daytime stages, which have a reputation for being all about mastering the levels, Sonic doesn't lose all of his rings when he's hit. Most of the time he only loses half. So if you've collected a lot of rings and you get hit, no biggie, you'll still have a few hundred rings to get points with at the end of the stage, and that's plenty. I'm not here to bash any of these games, I'm just saying, the ranking system is there for a reason. I personally think it's gone a little too easy to get a good ranking in these more recent games, but I don't think that's necessarily just because the developers want to be less demanding of players. I think it might also be because they don't put nearly as much thought into how much points are really worth in these games. SA2's point system is a lot more harsh, but I'd say it's fair. They were very careful to make sure that the amount of points required to get a good ranking were appropriate for the stage, because some of these stages simply give you a lot more opportunities to get points than others do. Some stages are longer, some are filled with more items or enemies, some have more rings, some just have a lot more going on in them, so it would be totally bonkers if every stage required around the same amount of points to get a good ranking. Some are over so quickly, you'll probably only make it to the end with a scant few thousand points. But in Cosmic Wall you can easily rack up as many as 100,000. Good lord. The methods for getting points as each character is pretty simple. In the treasure hunting stages, getting an emerald piece within a short amount of time will get you bonus points. Depending on how fast you are, it can range from a few hundred to 2,000 points, the most you can get for performing any one particular action in this game. Getting all of the emerald pieces quickly enough will get you a good ranking overall. However, if you rely on hint boxes to tell you where the emerald pieces are, points are deducted, making it harder, if not almost impossible, to get a high grade. I've gotta say, this is pretty smart. If the hint boxes weren't there at all, it would just make finding the pieces more of a hassle than it already is when you take everything else I went over in the other parts into account, especially when you consider that the first game did have these. As is, they don't give away too much. Like I said, they're just hints, but they do punish you. But only if you're really taking the game and the ranking system seriously. If you just want to play it and beat it, and don't care about proving that you have mad skills or whatever, they're there. Interestingly, the hints in the later stages are pretty confusing and will either outright lie to you, prompting you to do the exact opposite of what they say, or they'll be written backwards of all things. Getting points in the mech stages is interesting. You increase your score by locking onto lots of enemies at once. To a point. See, the highest bonus points you can get for blasting enemies is 2,000, but you only need to destroy around 10 enemies to get that many points. So if you lock onto, say, 20 or 30 enemies at once, you won't get nearly as many points as you will if you pace yourself and only take down a dozen or so at a time, milking these enemies for all the points they're worth. I guess, it's pretty smart. Some people may call it bad game design. I call it exploitable game design. But I can't help thinking it was intentional in some capacity. Then there's the speed stages. In part 4, I said these stages are pretty linear, but I wasn't going to hold that against them as a criticism. For a time I may have, because it seemed lazy and gimmicky to me, because I didn't really understand the designer's true intentions. But the more I play around with them, the more I realize that's just not true. If you take the intention of these stages in mind, they are very well designed. This was the first Sonic game to introduce a ranking system, and they build these levels entirely around this surprisingly bold concept. It's not just something they threw in there as an afterthought. Every decision they made when building these stages facilitates getting mad points, yo! Well, almost everything. I said in my original review that these are made to feel like a sort of obstacle course or skating park, and yeah, that's how they feel. And it works. They give you so many opportunities to get more points, and I swear, there are times when I just do some random, seemingly meaningless thing, thinking the designers wouldn't have taken that into account, but apparently they did, because I got more points for doing it. There are all sorts of examples, like in Radical Highway. Destroy a chain of enemies before touching the ground, and you get points. But if you also manage to land on a rail that's just barely within reach, then jump off of that and hit another enemy before touching the ground, you get even more points. There are much more obscure examples than that, and most of this kind of stuff wouldn't really matter in a more recent game. But they really put a lot of thought into building these levels to encourage players to see what they could get away with, and get a few hundred more or another 1,000 points here or there. And getting an A rank is not easy. It's not hard or terribly frustrating either, but you really have to be on a roll to truly take advantage of the terrain of these levels. And it's because SA2 does it so much better than a lot of similarly designed games that I can respect it, because they sort of pioneered this kind of level design and made it work really well for a time. I think the ranking system is one of the best things about this game. It shows how deep and well thought out it really is, in spite of whatever failings it has here or there. There are a couple of hiccups. This part of Metal Harbor is left out of multiplayer mode understandably, and in single player it's almost impossible to get an A rank if you don't reach the second handle. You can beat the level by simply grabbing the first one, but if you want those points you gotta go higher, and it really comes down to the wire. You could do great throughout the rest of the stage, but mess up here and you may as well start over. Thankfully, it's one of the shorter stages, and this part of Pyramid Cave just confuses the hell out of me. It's just a detour that doesn't do anything except make the stage take longer to beat. Thankfully, it doesn't make it much harder to get a good ranking, so they took this into account too. Aside from a few instances like that, these stages are pretty smart. They just have a different focus than I'd typically expect in a Sonic game. But that's not a bad thing if they do it well. I've already gone over how great the stages are for racing in two-player mode, and I have no doubt that had an influence on how they were made as well, on top of the ranking system. Then there's the missions. These are just extra things, like collecting a certain amount of rings, beating a stage in a set amount of time, finding a lost Chow, and even a hard mode, where the stages are designed a bit differently, with new enemy placement and whatnot, and they all adhere to the ranking system, so getting A ranks for every single mission is not something you do in one afternoon of play. And the treasure hunting stages have a weird hard mode. You only have like 30 seconds for each emerald piece on average if you want an A rank, which sounds unreasonable, especially in the later stages. But they always appear in the same 3 places, which spits in the face of everything I've said about the treasure hunting gameplay and just kinda leaves me dumbfounded. At least this makes it easier for someone who's quick on their feet to get those last few A ranks. Yet even that isn't enough to get every emblem in the game and unlock Green Hill Zone. I'll get to the emblems in a minute. Jumping ahead a bit, I may as well talk about Green Hill Zone. I unlocked this years before Generations came out, so this was the best 3D interpretation of a classic Sonic level we had for a time, and you can only play it after getting 180 emblems. Damn, is it worth it? Well, if you love SA2 enough, sure. Beginning to play Green Hill in Sonic Generations doesn't take nearly as much work. You just push the start button and... I'll give Sonic Adventure 2 this. Replay value is its bread and butter. Everything about this game is engineered to keep you playing over and over and over for as many times as it takes to get what you want. The multiplayer, the extra missions, the rankings, extras, this is by far the most replayable 3D Sonic game I've ever seen. It's pretty ambitious that way, but its ambition is much more focused than Sonic Adventure's ambition. It doesn't try to do everything like one big tech demo, but it does go above and beyond to do everything it does as best as it can. I won't pretend it's the best game ever, but it's much more competently made than bigger YouTubers like Aaron or Jared give it credit for. Some will only enjoy it for the speed stages, but that's on them. That's just cause the other playstyles aren't what they come to a Sonic game looking for, but I can't in good conscience say they're badly designed, or that only a third of this game is playable or whatever. Now though, we come to the last part of Sonic Adventure 2's gameplay that I'm going to talk about. Number 9. Chao. Let's talk about raising Chao. The Chao Gardens aren't for everybody, but even people who otherwise completely despise this game seem to love Chao. There is so much to say about the process of Chao rearing that I could easily make an entire video about just this. I'll mostly be talking about the gardens in the second game, since the first Adventure's gardens really aren't anything that special. Again, I like Eggman's Private Island, but the other two aren't that interesting. Anyway, here's how raising a Chao in Sonic Adventure 2 goes. The first time you visit the Chao Garden, you have to do it by locating a box containing a Chao key in an ordinary stage. Then you just have to make it to the end of the stage without being hit, and you'll be warped to Chao World, and then move on with a story once you exit the Chao lobby. Once you visit it as one character though, you can return here anytime you want using the stage select. You don't need any more Chao keys for that character, though they still work. You will have to find another key as each of the other characters in order for them to access the place though. Every single stage has a key or two somewhere in it, so you'll have plenty of chances to grab one and go there. Once you're in the lobby, you'll see a door to the neutral Chao Garden, the first of 3. In the garden, you'll find a Chao egg or 2. You can wait for the egg to hatch on its own, gently coax a Chao out by rocking it around, or smash it into the wall like a bastard. First thing you gotta do now is raise its stats so it'll be able to compete in races and karate tournaments and the like, since that's the only way to get the last few emblems in the game and unlock Green Hill Zone. You'll find a few trees in each garden growing nuts and fruit. Shaking the trees will make them drop food that can feed your Chao. Once a Chao is old enough, it'll be able to do this on its own. It's a start, but it's the slowest way to raise your stats. The fruit only raises certain stats and only a little bit, and the trees can only supply new fruit so fast so it'll become sickly if you're too demanding and shake it all the time, and you have to wait for your Chao to actually eat the stuff. If your Chao doesn't like the fruit much or just isn't all that hungry, it'll eat slowly, maybe pause a few times, or just throw it away. I'll get into faster ways of raising stats in a minute though. Let's talk about the alignment system. When you first enter the Chao Garden lobby, you only have access to one Chao Garden, where the Chao are born neutral. However, whoever you raise your Chao with will affect their development and influence them. One thing I find really interesting and a pretty bold move is that they actually give you the ability to outright abuse Chao. You can smack them around, throw them at walls, jump on them, stomp on them, and basically just beat the shit out of what are essentially still babies. Sure, it's all done in a slapstick cartoonish way, but it's still being incredibly abusive. If your character abuses a Chao, the poor little thing will be traumatized and won't want to be around them, or anyone who shares that character's alignment. If you pick them up, they'll squirm and try to escape. If you stand near them, they'll shudder and look away like they're trying really hard to pretend you're not there. Sometimes they'll even run away screaming, or just start crying. I gotta tell you, nothing in any game has ever made me feel quite like a piece of shit the way the sound of a crying Chao does. It's not a terribly obnoxious or over-the-top sound, just, well, listen. I think it goes even further than that, and if you play favorites and be really nice to one Chao, but be mean to the other, then the spoiled Chao might eventually start following your example and bully the other one. Naturally, all of this will go towards determining a Chao's alignment. If a hero character is abusive to Chao, they'll be inclined to connect more with the villain characters and become a dark Chao. And if you abuse them as a villain, they'll be more likely to become a hero Chao. And if you're affectionate to them and pet them and feed them and hold them and rock them a lot as one character, then they'll want to join that character's side. If you want to change a Chao's alignment for any reason, just bobbing them around or obsessively petting them for a minute or two with the right character will do it. It all depends on the role in the story. You'll even see the Chao changing color as you do this. Eventually, your baby Chao will enter Cocoon, and may either emerge as a hero Chao or a dark Chao depending on how you've treated it. Hatching a hero Chao will unlock the Hero Garden, which grows hero fruits, plays uplifting music, and looks appropriately heavenly. Hatching a dark Chao will unlock the Dark Chao Garden, which is dismal and hellish, just the way your little monster will like it. One thing I may as well note is that I really like the music of the Chao Gardens. In the first adventure game, all the Chao Gardens shared one theme, and it's a nice enough tune, it's upbeat and happy and all that, but it's so bombastic that if you had to listen to it for an extended period of time, I can see it getting obnoxious before long. But in Adventure 2, each garden has its own remix of this tune, and none of them are so overplayed. They're all kinda quiet and subdued, and aren't gonna drive you or your Chao crazy anytime soon. This was a good design choice in my book. It'll keep you in the Chao Gardens longer without having to mute the game, and the whole Chao theme is just a good, nifty melody in its own right that really shines in this game. Each Chao Garden can house a total of 8 Chao, so once you've unlocked the other gardens, you can raise a whopping 24 Chao at once. Good lord, just raising one of these is enough to keep a guy like me busy. Now let's go back to raising stats. Yes, you've got the fruits, but there are better ways of doing this. In the first Sonic adventure, you could raise your Chow's stats by bringing animals to them and letting the Chow assimilate them. I don't mind mutating Chow this way, but if you want to develop all of your Chow's different stats, you're gonna have to bring them a lot of different kinds of animals, so you could be changing their appearance constantly with new traits. In this game, your primary means of raising stats are Chaos Drives. See, Robotnik may be okay with using the life force of tiny animals to power his robots, but Gun isn't nearly that cruel, so they use these Chaos Drives as a power source for their robots. You can still find animals wandering about in the levels here and there, or even call them out certain places by whistling to them, but they're much more scarce than last time, and animals dropped by Eggman's robots can't be taken to the Chow Gardens. Anyway, animals will still raise your Chow's stats, but they're mostly there to give your Chow cosmetic changes, now that you have an alternative energy source that's much more readily available in the stages. So if you want your Chow to look a certain way, you can bring them that animal, and then just not bring them anymore. Chaos Drives will give your little guy a good old charge, and depending on the color, it'll enhance their ability to run, swim, climb, glide, and other things. There's your flying, power, swimming, running stats, and your stamina, which is probably the most important of all. And I don't believe Chaos Drives boost that, so you'll still need to feed your Chow some actual food on the side. I hear that just juicing up your Chow with one type of Chaos Drive for a long time will change a Chow's color or make them look different. And I don't know exactly how this works, but I do have a Chow that looks like Sonic. I don't remember where I got it, but it's there. After a while, you can take your Chow to the Chow Kindergarten, where you name them, see how they're doing health-wise, diagnose what kind of personality traits they're developing, or just leave them in class for a little while and come back for them later. They'll learn how to sing and dance and draw, all sorts of things. It's here that you can also access the black market, where you can buy all kinds of special fruit and other goodies using the rings you collected in the main game as currency. Some people don't even discover this until they've already played the game long enough to have racked up thousands of rings and just splurge it all. It even happened to me. You can even purchase specially colored eggs here to hatch new types of Chow. Sometimes they'll even have special Chow fruit in stock, which appropriately look like Chow heads, and these will raise your Chow stats across the board like nothing else. You can get these numbers to reach the thousands after a while with these. You can also get gifts for your Chow like a television or a ball, and you'll sometimes see them drawing or singing or doing whatever they learned to do in kindergarten. One thing that astounds me in a good way is just how much personality these creatures have, and what a wide range of behaviors you'll witness as they grow up. It's really fascinating, and I think it's a huge part of what kept people coming back to raise their Chow, to see how they turn out. There's so many factors that go into this. Your Chow could turn out any number of ways. Then there's breeding. I don't know if Chow really have a sex or even a gender, as almost any Chow seems capable of breeding with any other Chow once they reach a certain age. Once a Chow is ready to mate, they'll find a place to sit and grow flowers, waiting for another Chow to enter their circle. Just bring another Chow over, and in most cases, this'll happen. Then there's competing in the Chow races and karate tournaments. You better have raised those stats pretty damn high, or those other Chow will mop the floor with yours. Once your Chow stats are high enough, you can compete and actually stand a chance. In the races, you mostly watch them go and see how much your training pays off. The races are kind of automated, but not really. You mostly watch your Chow go for it, but at any time you can use up a little bit of the stamina meter to give them a quick boost. Using the stamina meter at key moments to skip parts of the track that may slow them down, like say, if they're gliding over a river or a chasm, will carry them much further and can give them a huge lead over the other characters. Don't use up too much stamina though. If your stamina meter runs out, your Chow is gonna get dead tired and slow down to a crawl for the rest of the race, giving other Chow a chance to catch up and pass yours. Just be smart about not overexerting your Chow and they'll be a winner. Karate tournaments are a bit simpler and a bit more automated. All you really do is mash buttons to cheer your Chow on if they're not doing so well and need some encouragement. Aside from that, just make them as strong as you can and hope for the best. Once you've won all these events, you get those emblems, unlock Green Hill, and finish the game. Then there's seeing your Chow die. Yeah, once your Chow reaches a certain age, usually 5 or 6 in Chow years, they'll enter their last cocoon, and if you've given them a good life, it'll be pink. This means the Chow will be reincarnated and emerge as a new baby Chow, that to my knowledge inherits some traits from their previous self. I haven't actually done this, so I wouldn't know for sure. After a few of these life cycles pass, and provided you've introduced them to every single animal in the game, they'll become a Chaos Chow, which means they'll live forever as your beautiful little angel or devil baby. Gosh, a magical immortal Chow? I'd say it's a decent reward for all that work. If your Chow reaches the end of its first life cycle and finds themselves unhappy after a life of abuse and neglect, their cocoon will be gray and they'll disappear, gone forever. Wow. It really makes you feel like you've let somebody down. Then if you're a total Chow nut who has spent like 2,000 hours breeding 24 Chaos Chow and you need to make room for a new one, you can just say goodbye to one of them. Just bring your chow to some machine in the garden and release them into the wild, and you'll never see them again. It's basically just a softer way for the game to delete your chow, only done under this pretense of them being free so you don't have to feel that bad about it. Needless to say, I haven't done this either. So now you know all the fundamentals of raising a chow. Wasn't that interesting? Well, maybe not, but jeez, I probably should have made this its own video. Anyway, it shouldn't be too hard to see why people love chow so much that, in some cases, it redeems a game that may very well drive them crazy the rest of the time. And maybe I've shown you why there are those, myself included, who at least for a time were willing to sink so many hours into raising our chow to be the best. While I disagree with ProJar's general opinions on Sonic Adventure 2, I have to agree with him on one thing. Some people do have a very skewed memory of this game based on their experiences with a chow, replaying their favorite stages over and over again just to get a few more chaos drives, a special animal, or enough rings to buy more chow fruit on the black market. Because of this, some people do have a very warped and limited view of this game, and upon revisiting it, may find a very different game than the one they remember. But now you should understand that I don't think these games suck, and I don't think only a sixth or a third of the gameplay is any good. I don't think the mech levels suck, I don't think the treasure hunts suck, I think most of these stages are well designed. But some just aren't looking for this sort of thing in a Sonic game, so they'll be super critical of it and make very tiny flaws seem like huge problems that damn these games. And it's because of such people that there's been this huge, unfair, and mostly undeserved backlash against these games in the last few years, and anyone who dares not to fall in lockstep with the rest of these bigger YouTubers' fan bases and say the adventure games are downright bad save for a few good parts. To me, the Chow Gardens are just yet another layer of enjoyment on top of an already competent pair of games. I don't know what it is. Maybe I am just this huge fanboy with incredibly low standards who doesn't know any better and simply isn't informed enough to understand that it's not okay to enjoy these games in their entirety. Nah. Anyway, the Chow are something special that I do feel added a lot to the world of Sonic around the time. They were one of those great things that just came along now and then and made the world of Sonic games feel a little bigger and more interesting, and it really makes these two games in particular stand out. I do wish they'd bring back the Chow Gardens in a future game, but I understand if they don't. The focus of Sonic has just drifted elsewhere in recent years. Any inclusion of the Chow in a game that doesn't feel connected to the adventure games and to chaos in some way would just feel tacked on and weird. And even in Adventure 2, it feels that way just a little bit, but it's okay because these Chow Gardens are just so good. Sonic Adventure 2 is a pretty cool game. It's flawed, yes, and maybe a little unfocused, but never was there anything in it that was so atrocious it could compel me to deem it bad as a whole. It's exploding with a huge amount of content and replayability, and I'd say it's one of the most distinctive 3D Sonic games ever released. A lot of Sonic games just come and go, but I think people will remember this one forever. It keeps people coming back to it because it's left such a huge mark in Sonic's history. It's just awesome in some ways. And if it bothers you that I like it, or the parts of it that you don't, well, sorry, but I'm not a super critical kind of guy. I don't think Sonic is beneath the careful, fair analysis that the likes of Mario or Zelda have garnered from these bigger YouTube names, and I want to give these games their due. I do have more to say about this, but I'll save that for the next and final video in this Sonic Adventure re-review series, my final statement on this whole thing that started in recent years. This video is long enough as is. For now, I feel like introducing you to someone. Here's my Chow. Ain't he special? I named him Chasm. I thought it was Chasm at the time, like it's part of a theme, but I was just a dumb kid. I've raised several Chow, but I'll be perfectly honest, this is the only one I like. The others are just sort of there to make the place feel more populated. Anyway, yeah, Chasm is my special little guy, not just because he won all those races and karate tournaments for me, because he's so darn unique. I remember letting him nuzzle a penguin back when he was a baby, which gave him huge orange eyebrows. I didn't really give him much thought. I just let him have it and fed him chaos drives from then on. Then he cocooned himself and came out with even bigger rainbow eyebrows. That was cool. I brought another animal to him and the eyebrows were switched around with some other less developed trait, and I didn't like that, so I reset the game. I just like the eyebrows because they look like something specific to him and not just some animal. They certainly make him stand out, so it's not like he isn't easy to find in a crowd. He's also a ghost if the tail is any indication. I don't remember how that happened, but hey, it goes nicely with the halo and the eyebrows, like he's my magic angel baby monster. His teacher says he's lazy, but I wouldn't go that far. He just likes doing his own thing. He seems cool with me picking him up and carrying him around a lot. The other Chows squirm after a little bit, but I don't think he's ever done it. I guess he just really likes me after all he's been through with me. Sometimes I just like to leave him alone and watch him, see what he does next. He'll nap for a while and then just start running around on a moment's notice and surprise me with something. He's also a good swimmer, no surprise there after all those races, but after a while he'll just stop and float there. I don't even know if he's treading since he doesn't have legs anymore. I think it just means he's happy. Anyway, I love this Chow, and I wouldn't have him any other way. It's weird to go months, sometimes even a few years, without touching this game, and then I pop it in my GameCube and he's still there, living in a beat-up memory card and not having changed a bit. I try to keep my visits short though. I think he only has a few hours of life left in art time, and I don't want to use it up. You know, I'd consider doing this whole thing where I'd leave the game alone for a while, bring a camera, and see if he'd go in his cocoon for the last time. I'd show footage of him while reading this script, saying how much I love him and all that, and then suddenly he'd be gone and I'd start freaking out and shouting his name. No, don't go! And it probably would have been great, but I didn't want to risk such a thing being permanent. I just didn't have it in me. So this is basically me going, hey, I was going to put a gag here, but I'm too lazy. Hello! Some people drift further and further away from this game as the years go by and they find less to enjoy. And a long time ago, I thought that's where I was going too, but in recent years, I've just started liking this game more and more. I don't know why. It seems like I'm always discovering things I didn't pay any mind back in the day, but that increase my respect for this game now, and I hope people accept that, even if they think I'm just a crazy person. Whatever. See you next time as we bring this to an end.